In this video, we are going to discuss the boundaries of the pterygopalatine fossa. Now, this is the anterior part of the skull, and this is the lateral part of the skull. The pterygopalatine fossa lies in the infratemporal fossa. So, to find the pterygopalatine fossa, I'll have to move the skull downwards. This part, this opening, called the pterygomaxillary fissure, and this is basically the opening of pterygopalatine fossa. If you move inside from this opening, then you will enter into the pterygopalatine fossa. Now let's look at some boundaries of the pterygopalatine fossa. Anteriorly, it is bounded by the posterior surface of maxilla. Now this bone is the maxilla. If we move backwards, this is the posterior surface of maxilla, which is going inside the pterygomaxillary fissure. So this forms the anterior boundary of the pterygopalatine fossa. Posteriorly, it is bounded by the pterygoid process. What is the pterygoid process? This structure here, this is called the pterygoid process. Now the pterygoid process is the part of sphenoid bone. This bone here is the greater wing of sphenoid. If we move down and see, then this thing is the greater wing. And this pterygoid process is continuous with this bone. That means this is a part of the sphenoid bone. So the pterygoid process has two plates, a medial pterygoid plate, this one, and a lateral pterygoid plate, this one, which are fused to each other anteriorly. This is the line of fusion. So this structure forms the posterior wall of the pterygopalatine fossa. If I pierce this, I will enter into the fossa. Now this is the anterior boundary formed by the posterior surface of the maxilla, and this is the posterior boundary formed by the anterior surface of the pterygoid process. This structure from the inside, it forms the posterior boundary of the pterygopalatine fossa. So this fissure is called the pterygomaxillary fissure because it lies between the two bones, the pterygoid process of the sphenoid bone and the maxilla. That's why they are called the pterygo. It is called the pterygomaxillary fissure. Now the roof of the pterygopalatine fossa is formed by the sphenoid bone. As this is the sphenoid greater wing, so if we move towards the medial side, it will be continuous with the body of sphenoid. This structure here is the body of sphenoid, and this is the greater wing. And the pterygopalatine fossa lies somewhere down here, below this bone. So this part of the sphenoid bone forms the roof of the pterygopalatine fossa, which is not very clearly visible if we see it from below. So anteriorly, maxilla, posterior surface, posteriorly, anterior surface of the pterygoid process, and superiorly, it is bounded by the body of sphenoid bone. Inferiorly, it is bounded by the pyramidal process of palatine. Now, where is the palatine bone? This is the hard palate, which is formed by two bones. The anterior part is formed by the palatine shelves of maxilla, and this posterior part is formed by the palatine bones, the horizontal plates of palatine bones, and the separation between these two bones is this suture, which is called the palatomaxillary suture. So this bone is the palatine bone, and a part of this bone is moving between the maxilla and the pterygoid process over here. So this is called the pyramidal process of palatine bone, which is not visible here because these two bones are fused when they come inferiorly. Superiorly, they are not fused, and the pterygomaxillary fissure is lying between them. But as you go down, the pterygoid process is fused to the posterior surface of maxilla, and the pyramidal process of palatine bone, it gets anchored in between these two bones. That's why you cannot see it here, but the floor of the pterygopalatine fossa is formed by this pyramidal process of the palatine bone. So anteriorly, the posterior surface of maxilla, posteriorly the anterior surface of pterygoid process, superiorly body of sphenoid bone, and inferiorly it is bounded by the pyramidal process of palatine bone. Now comes the medial boundary. If you see inside, that part is the medial boundary. The bone which you can see through the pterygomaxillary fissure, that is the medial boundary, and it is formed by the perpendicular plate of palatine bone. Now to find the perpendicular plate of palatine bone, we move towards the nasal cavity. This is the horizontal plate of palatine bone, and it moves upwards to form the perpendicular plate. So the horizontal plate and perpendicular plate are at 90 degrees to each other. If you see it from here, this part is the medial plate of the pterygoid process, medial pterygoid plate, and after that comes the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone, and this is the suture between them. So this is the medial pterygoid plate, and this is the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone. If you see it on this side, it is more clear. This structure is the medial pterygoid plate, and this is the suture between the medial pterygoid plate and the perpendicular plate of palatine bone. So this is the perpendicular plate of palatine bone, and this is the medial pterygoid plate separated by this suture. So this structure forms the medial boundary of the pterygopalatine fossa, and it has a foramen in it which is called the sphenopalatine foramen. This one, this structure here is the sphenopalatine foramen, and if you see it on this side, this is the pterygopalatine fossa of the left side, this is the pterygoid process, this is the maxilla, and there is the foramen, the foramen which is called the sphenopalatine foramen. It is lying inside. You can see it on this side, but on the other side it is not very prominent. Now these were the boundaries of the pterygopalatine fossa. In the next video I will discuss the communications of the pterygopalatine fossa. So I hope you like the video. If you do, please subscribe and share, and also like my videos. Thank you.